Have you ever wondered why some people seem to reinvent themselves effortlessly while others remain trapped in the same identity for decades? Have you ever thought about the possibility that the person you are right now is nothing more than a cage you've built around yourself? This video will fundamentally change how you see yourself, your potential, and the invisible chains that society has placed around your identity. By the end of this journey, you will understand that you are not who you think you are, and more importantly, you will learn how to become whoever you choose to be. The ancient philosophers spoke of transformation. The alchemists dreamed of turning lead into gold. But the greatest transformation, the most powerful alchemy, has always been the recreation of the self. This is Law 25 from the 48 Laws of Power, and it might be the most dangerous law you will ever encounter. Because once you understand it, once you truly internalize it, there is no going back to the comfortable prison of your current identity. Let me tell you a story about transformation that will help you understand the depths of what we're exploring today. In the year 1500 and something, a young Italian diplomat named Niccolò Machiavelli found himself imprisoned, tortured, and stripped of everything he had worked for. His career was destroyed. His reputation was shattered. He had every reason to accept defeat and fade into obscurity. But instead, he did something remarkable. He didn't just rebuild his old life. He created an entirely new identity. He transformed himself from a failed politician into one of history's most influential philosophers. The man who wrote The Prince was not the same man who entered that prison. He had died and been reborn, consciously and deliberately. This is not a metaphor. This is not poetic language. This is the literal truth of human transformation. Every single day, millions of your cells die and are replaced. The person you were 7 years ago no longer exists on a biological level. Your body has completely regenerated itself. Yet your mind, your identity, your sense of self remains trapped in the past. Why? Because you've been conditioned to believe that consistency is a virtue. That changing who you are is somehow dishonest or fake. Society has convinced you that you must be authentic, which really means you must remain the same forever. But here's the twist that will sound wrong but is absolutely true: authenticity is the enemy of power. The concept of being true to yourself is one of the most limiting beliefs ever planted in the human mind. Think about it. What is this self that you're supposed to be true to? Is it the self that was shaped by your parents' expectations? Is it the self that was molded by your childhood traumas? Is it the self that absorbed the limiting beliefs of your environment? That self, that identity you cling to so desperately, is nothing more than a collection of other people's opinions, society's programming, and random accidents of circumstance. The greatest individuals throughout history understood this secret. They knew that the self is not discovered, it is created. Julius Caesar was not born Caesar. He created himself through deliberate myth-making and careful construction of his public persona. Napoleon Bonaparte was a short Corsican nobody until he decided to become an emperor and bent reality to match his vision. Madonna has reinvented herself so many times that trying to pin down her true identity is like trying to catch smoke. Each version was authentic in the moment, yet completely different from the last. Now let's bring this into the modern world, because this law is more relevant today than ever before. Consider Steve Jobs. When he returned to Apple in 1997, the company was 90 days from bankruptcy. But Jobs didn't just save Apple by making better products. He saved it by recreating himself. The Steve Jobs who returned was not the same impulsive, difficult young man who had been fired in 1985. He had spent 12 years in the wilderness, learning, evolving, and consciously reconstructing his identity. He adopted the uniform of the black turtleneck. He refined his presentation style. He created a persona of the Zen-like visionary. Was this authentic? Who cares? It was effective. It was powerful. It changed the world. Look at any successful modern company and you'll see the same principle at work. Google started as a search engine. Now it's an artificial intelligence company that happens to do search. Amazon started selling books. Now it's everything from cloud computing to entertainment to grocery stores. Netflix mailed DVDs. Then it streamed content. Now it creates content. These companies understand that identity is fluid, that reinvention is survival, that those who cannot recreate themselves become extinct. But here's where it gets even more interesting. This principle doesn't just apply to individuals and companies. It applies to nations, cultures, and entire civilizations. Japan was a feudal society. Then it became an imperial power. After World War II, it reinvented itself as a technological and economic powerhouse. China was the sick man of Asia. Then it became the world's factory. Now it's positioning itself as a leader in green technology and artificial intelligence. These transformations didn't happen accidentally. They were conscious choices made by leaders who understood that identity is a tool, not a prison. Now, let me explain this through an analogy that will make everything crystal clear. Think of a caterpillar. A caterpillar doesn't gradually evolve into a butterfly. It doesn't slowly grow wings and learn to fly. Instead, it enters a cocoon and completely dissolves. Its entire body breaks down into a soup of cells. Then, from that primordial liquid, an entirely new creature is born. The butterfly shares the caterpillar's DNA, but it is not the same being. It cannot go back to crawling on leaves. It cannot return to its old form. The transformation is total and irreversible. Human transformation works the same way, but with one crucial difference. We must consciously choose to enter the cocoon. We must deliberately break down our old identity and rebuild ourselves from the ground up. Most people never do this. They spend their entire lives as caterpillars, never realizing they have the genetic code for flight embedded in their very being. They look at butterflies with envy and wonder, never understanding that they too could transform if only they had the courage to dissolve their current form. This is where we enter dangerous territory. This is where the dark truth reveals itself. Because the ability to recreate yourself is not just a tool for personal growth. It's a weapon. And like all weapons, it can be used for good or evil. History is filled with individuals who mastered this law and used it to manipulate, deceive, and control others. They understood that people are desperate to believe in personas, in characters, in archetypes. So they crafted identities that would give them power over others. Consider the con artist. The greatest con artists are not just good liars. They are method actors who completely inhabit their false identities. They don't pretend to be someone else. They become someone else, at least temporarily. Frank Abagnale, whose story inspired the film Catch Me If You Can, didn't just dress up as a pilot and a doctor. He studied their mannerisms, their language, their worldview until he could think like them. He recreated himself so completely that even experts couldn't detect the deception. But let's go deeper. Let's examine the psychological mechanisms that make this law so powerful. Humans are pattern recognition machines. We are constantly trying to categorize people, to put them in boxes, to predict their behavior based on their identity. When you control your identity, you control how others perceive you, and therefore how they interact with you. This is why politicians spend millions on image consulting. This is why corporations invest heavily in branding. They understand that identity shapes reality. Here's a fascinating example from psychology. There's a phenomenon called the produce effect, where people conform to the identity of their avatars in virtual environments. If you give someone an attractive avatar, they become more confident and outgoing. If you give them a tall avatar, they become more aggressive in negotiations. The identity changes the behavior, which changes the outcome. Now realize that you are always wearing an avatar. You're wearing one right now. It's called your personality, your reputation, your social role. And just like in a video game, you can choose which avatar to wear. Let's talk about office politics, because this is where most people encounter the practical application of this law. In every workplace, there are invisible hierarchies and unspoken rules. The person who gets promoted is rarely the most competent. It's the person who has crafted the right identity. They've become the reliable one, or the creative one, or the leader. They understood that their actual skills matter less than the perception of their skills. They recreated themselves as the kind of person who deserves promotion, and then the promotion followed naturally. I once knew a mid-level manager who was stuck in his position for years. He was competent, hardworking, and knowledgeable. But he was invisible. He had the identity of a follower, a worker bee. Then something changed. He started dressing differently, speaking differently, carrying himself differently. He stopped asking for permission and started making decisions. He began sharing bold ideas in meetings, even when they weren't fully formed. Within 6 months, he was promoted to senior management. His skills hadn't changed. His work quality hadn't improved. But his identity had transformed, and everyone around him responded to that new identity. This is the secret that the powerful know and the powerless ignore: competence is not enough. Virtue is not enough. Hard work is not enough. You must also craft the right identity. You must become the kind of person who deserves what you want. This might sound cynical or manipulative, but it's simply how human social dynamics work. We're not rational creatures making objective assessments. We're social primates responding to status signals and identity markers. Now let's examine the evolutionary roots of this behavior, because understanding the why makes the how much more powerful. For millions of years, humans lived in small tribes where your identity was fixed. You were born into a role, and you died in that role. The chief's son became a chief. The hunter's daughter learned to gather. There was no social mobility, no reinvention, no transformation. Your identity was your destiny. But this created a problem. As human societies grew larger and more complex, we needed more flexibility. We needed people who could adapt, who could change, who could fill different roles as circumstances demanded. So we developed something unique in the animal kingdom: the ability to perform identity. Other animals have fixed behaviors determined by their biology. A lion is always a lion. A sheep is always a sheep. But humans can be lions one day and sheep the next, depending on what the situation requires. We can be aggressive or passive, confident or humble, leader or follower. This flexibility is what allowed us to dominate every ecosystem on Earth. We could adapt not by changing our bodies, but by changing our identities. But here's the catch. This flexibility, this ability to recreate ourselves, comes with a cost. It creates an existential crisis. If we can be anyone, then who are we really? If identity is performative, then what is authentic? This question has haunted philosophers for millennia. The ancient Greeks told stories of shapeshifters and gods who could take any form. These weren't just myths. They were explorations of the terrifying truth that identity is fluid, that the self is not fixed, that we are all constantly performing versions of ourselves. The modern world has amplified this crisis exponentially. On social media, we can be anyone we want. We curate our images, craft our narratives, and present carefully edited versions of ourselves to the world. The Instagram influencer is not showing you her real life. She's showing you a performance of her idealized life. The LinkedIn professional is not revealing his struggles and doubts. He's projecting an image of competence and success. We all understand this intellectually, yet we still fall for these performances. We still compare our messy realities to other people's polished personas. This creates what I call the authenticity trap. We're told to be authentic, to be ourselves, to be real. But what does that even mean in a world where identity is performance? The truth is that authenticity is just another performance. When someone says they're being authentic, they're really saying they've chosen to perform a particular version of themselves that feels more comfortable or more aligned with their self-image. But it's still a choice. It's still a performance. There is no essential self underneath all the masks. It's masks all the way down. This might sound nihilistic or depressing, but it's actually incredibly liberating. If there's no essential self to be true to, then you're free to become anyone you choose. You're not betraying yourself by changing. You're not being fake by adopting a new identity. You're simply exercising the most fundamentally human capability, the ability to transform. The caterpillar doesn't betray itself by becoming a butterfly. It fulfills its potential. Let me share another historical example that illustrates the full power and danger of this law. In the 17th century, there was a woman named Jeanne de Valois Saint-Remy who convinced the French court that she was descended from royalty. She wasn't. She was a con artist. But she recreated herself so completely, inhabited her false identity so thoroughly, that she was able to pull off one of history's greatest scams, the affair of the diamond necklace. She convinced a cardinal that Queen Marie Antoinette wanted to secretly purchase an enormously expensive diamond necklace through him. She forged letters. She hired an actress to impersonate the queen. She constructed an entire alternate reality, and people believed it because her identity was so convincing. The scam eventually unraveled, but the damage was done. The scandal damaged the monarchy's reputation and contributed to the revolutionary fervor that would eventually lead to the French Revolution. One woman, through the power of recreated identity, helped topple an empire. This is the dark side of Law 25. In the wrong hands, the ability to recreate yourself becomes a tool for manipulation and destruction. But let's balance that with a more positive example. Consider Malala Yousafzai. She was shot in the head by the Taliban for the crime of wanting an education. She could have let that trauma define her. She could have lived the rest of her life as a victim. Instead, she consciously recreated herself as a global advocate for education and women's rights. She transformed her suffering into purpose. She became a Nobel Prize winner, not despite her trauma, but by alchemizing it into a new identity. The girl who was shot became the woman who cannot be silenced. This is the choice we all face. We can let circumstances define us, or we can use circumstances as raw material for self-creation. Every setback is an opportunity to shed an old identity and forge a new one. Every failure is a chance to ask, who do I want to become now? Every ending is a beginning in disguise. Now, let's talk about the practical mechanics of self-recreation, because understanding the principle is useless without knowing how to apply it. The first step is the hardest. You must kill your current identity. Not literally, of course, but psychologically. You must be willing to let go of the story you've been telling yourself about who you are. This is terrifying because our identities are our security blankets. They're how we make sense of the world. They're how we know what to do in any given situation. Think about it. When someone asks you to describe yourself, what do you say? I'm a teacher. I'm a parent. I'm an introvert. I'm a creative person. These labels feel comforting because they give you a sense of stability and predictability. But they're also chains. Every time you say I am something, you're limiting your potential. You're telling the universe and yourself what you cannot be. The teacher identity prevents you from being the entrepreneur. The introvert identity prevents you from being the charismatic leader. The creative identity prevents you from being the analytical strategist. To recreate yourself, you must first recognize these labels as choices, not facts. You're not inherently anything. You've simply been playing a role for so long that you've forgotten it's a role. The great actors call this getting typecast. Once people see you as a certain character, they can't imagine you as anything else. But the most successful actors fight against typecasting. They deliberately choose roles that break their established image. They show their range. They prove they're not trapped in one identity. You must do the same. Choose a small aspect of your identity and deliberately act against it. If you're the quiet one, speak up in a meeting. If you're the serious one, tell a joke. If you're the follower, make a decision. These small acts of rebellion against your established identity create cracks in the prison walls. They show you and others that you're capable of being different. They open up new possibilities. The second step is to study the identity you want to inhabit. This is where most people fail. They think transformation is about positive thinking or affirmations. It's not. It's about deep, methodical study and practice. If you want to become confident, study confident people. Watch how they move, how they speak, how they hold their bodies. Notice the specific behaviors that signal confidence. Then practice those behaviors until they become second nature. This might sound like fake it till you make it, but it's more sophisticated than that. You're not faking. You're learning. Just like learning to play an instrument or speak a new language, you're acquiring a new skill set. The skill set is a new identity. At first, it will feel awkward and unnatural. You'll feel like an imposter. Good. That discomfort is proof that you're growing, that you're expanding beyond your current limitations. Here's where modern neuroscience supports ancient wisdom. Your brain is plastic, meaning it physically changes based on your thoughts and behaviors. When you repeatedly perform behaviors associated with a new identity, your brain creates new neural pathways. Over time, these pathways become stronger while the old ones atrophy. The new behaviors become automatic. The new identity becomes natural. You haven't faked anything. You've literally rewired your brain. The third step is to control your narrative. Humans are storytelling creatures. We understand our lives as narratives with characters, plots, and meanings. The story you tell about yourself shapes how others see you and how you see yourself. Most people let others write their story. They accept the labels and judgments placed on them by parents, teachers, colleagues, and society. They become characters in someone else's narrative. But you can seize control of the story. You can be the author of your own myth. This means consciously crafting the narrative of your transformation. When someone asks about your past, you don't have to give them the full, messy truth. You give them the version of the story that supports your new identity. This isn't lying. It's editing. It's emphasizing certain aspects and de-emphasizing others. It's framing your experiences in a way that serves your present goals rather than trapping you in your past limitations. Politicians do this constantly. Barack Obama could have presented himself as the son of a single mother who struggled with identity issues. Instead, he crafted a narrative of his diverse background as a source of unique insight and strength. Donald Trump could have been known as the businessman who filed for bankruptcy multiple times. Instead, he created a narrative of being a dealmaker who always comes out on top. Love them or hate them, you have to admit they understood the power of controlling their narrative. The fourth step is the most subtle and perhaps most important. You must create distance from your old identity. Physical distance helps. This is why people who move to new cities often experience dramatic personal transformations. In a new environment, no one knows your old story. You're not the person you were in high school or college. You're not trapped by the expectations of family and old friends. You can be anyone you choose because there's no established pattern to break. But even if you can't physically move, you can create psychological distance. Change your appearance. Adopt new habits. Spend time with different people. Read different books. Consume different media. Every choice you make either reinforces your old identity or builds your new one. There is no neutral ground. Every moment is either death or rebirth. Now, here's something most people don't realize: your environment is constantly trying to keep you in your old identity. This isn't malicious. It's just how social systems work. Every relationship you have is based on an implicit contract about who you are and what role you play. When you change, you threaten to break those contracts. People will resist your transformation, not because they don't want you to grow, but because your growth destabilizes their understanding of the world. Your parents might sabotage your transformation because they're comfortable with the child you were. Your partner might feel threatened because they fell in love with a different version of you. Your colleagues might undermine you because your new confidence disrupts the office hierarchy. This is normal. This is expected. Don't be surprised by it, and don't let it stop you. The greatest transformations often require breaking relationships or at least radically renegotiating them. This sounds harsh, but it's true. Some people will grow with you. Others will try to keep you small. You must be ruthless in identifying which is which. The people who truly love you will support your transformation even if it's uncomfortable for them. The people who are invested in your old identity will fight it. Let them go. This brings us to one of the most profound aspects of this law: the relationship between identity and morality. We're taught that certain behaviors are good and others are bad. But what if morality itself is just another identity marker? What if being the good person or the nice guy is just another cage preventing your growth? This is a dangerous question, but it must be asked. Think about the concept of karma or the golden rule: treat others as you'd like to be treated. On the surface, this seems like universal wisdom. But from the perspective of power, it's a trap. It keeps you playing by rules that others may not follow. It makes you predictable. It prevents you from doing what's necessary to achieve your goals. The person who always tries to be good is easy to manipulate because their behavior is constrained by their identity as a good person. Now, I'm not saying you should become evil or abandon all moral principles. I'm saying you should recognize that your moral identity might be limiting you. The most effective people have flexible morality that adapts to circumstances. They can be ruthless when necessary and compassionate when it serves them. They're not trapped by the need to maintain a consistent moral identity. They understand that morality is a tool, not a master. This is what Machiavelli meant when he advised that the prince must learn how not to be good. He wasn't advocating for pure evil. He was recognizing that leadership sometimes requires actions that don't fit comfortable moral categories. The CEO who fires people to save the company is neither good nor bad. They're doing what the situation demands. The soldier who kills in war is neither virtuous nor sinful. They're fulfilling a role that circumstances require. When you recreate yourself, you must be willing to shed not just your personality traits but also your moral certainties. This doesn't mean becoming amoral. It means developing a more sophisticated understanding of ethics that goes beyond simple good and bad categories. It means recognizing that identity and morality are intertwined, and both must be tools under your conscious control rather than invisible masters controlling you. Let's examine this through the lens of evolution again. In nature, there's no morality. The lion that kills the gazelle is not evil. The gazelle that escapes is not good. They're simply playing their roles in the great drama of survival. Humans added morality as a social technology to enable cooperation in large groups. But that technology comes with costs. It constrains behavior. It limits adaptability. It makes us vulnerable to those who understand that morality is a game with rules that can be bent or broken when necessary. The most successful civilizations throughout history have understood this. Rome conquered the world not because Romans were morally superior but because they were willing to do whatever was necessary. They could be diplomatic or brutal, honorable or treacherous, depending on what the situation required. They weren't trapped by a fixed moral identity. Modern superpowers operate the same way. They speak the language of human rights and democracy while doing whatever serves their interests. This isn't hypocrisy. It's sophisticated understanding of power. Now, let's talk about the role of suffering in transformation, because this is where theory meets reality. Every great transformation involves pain. The caterpillar must dissolve in the cocoon. The snake must shed its skin. The old you must die for the new you to be born. This is not metaphorical. You will experience real psychological pain as you let go of your old identity. There's a concept in psychology called ego death. It's most commonly associated with psychedelic experiences, but it can happen through any profound transformation. Ego death is the temporary dissolution of your sense of self. It's terrifying because you lose the narrative that holds your reality together. But on the other side of that terror is incredible freedom. When you've experienced the death of one identity, you realize that identity itself is fluid. You lose your fear of transformation because you've proven to yourself that you can survive it. Many spiritual traditions recognize this principle. The Buddhist concept of no-self teaches that the ego is an illusion. The Christian idea of being born again requires the death of the old self. The shamanic vision quest involves symbolic death and rebirth. These aren't just religious metaphors. They're psychological technologies for facilitating transformation. They provide structured frameworks for the terrifying process of self-recreation. In the modern world, we've lost most of these frameworks. We don't have initiation rituals or vision quests. We don't have clear pathways from one life stage to another. This leaves most people trapped in perpetual adolescence, never fully transforming into mature adults because they lack the structures to support that transformation. They keep playing the same roles, telling the same stories, living the same limited lives decade after decade. But you don't need ancient rituals to transform. You need only understanding and will. You need to recognize that the pain of staying the same eventually exceeds the pain of change. You need to see your current identity as a prison rather than a home. You need to want freedom more than you want comfort. This is the essential choice that determines whether you'll ever recreate yourself or remain trapped forever. Consider the midlife crisis. Society mocks it, but it's actually a healthy response to the realization that your current identity isn't working anymore. The problem is that most people handle it poorly. They buy a sports car or have an affair, trying to recapture youth rather than genuinely transforming. They're trying to modify their old identity instead of creating a new one. Real transformation requires more courage. It requires burning down the old life and building something entirely new from the ashes. Let me tell you about a modern example that perfectly illustrates this principle. There's a man named Chris Gardner who was homeless, sleeping in subway bathrooms with his young son. He had every reason to accept that identity, to let circumstances define him, to give up. Instead, he recreated himself. He studied finance. He convinced a firm to give him an unpaid internship even though he had no qualifications and no home. He performed the identity of a successful stockbroker so convincingly that it became real. His story inspired the film The Pursuit of Happiness, but the real lesson isn't about happiness. It's about the power of conscious self-creation. Gardner didn't wait for his circumstances to change before changing his identity. He changed his identity first, and his circumstances followed. This is the key that most people miss. They think they need to achieve something before they can become someone. It's backwards. You must become first, then you achieve. You must inhabit the identity of success before success arrives. This feels like delusion, but it's actually how reality works. Your identity shapes your behavior creates results, and results reinforce identity. The question is, which identity will you start with? Now we need to address the elephant in the room. Isn't this all just manipulation? Isn't teaching people to recreate themselves just encouraging them to become liars and frauds? This is where we must be brutally honest. Yes, in a sense, you are manipulating. But you're always manipulating. You can't not manipulate. Every interaction you have with another human being involves some level of impression management and strategic self-presentation. The only question is whether you're doing it consciously or unconsciously, skillfully or clumsily. The person who claims they're just being themselves is not somehow more authentic or honest. They're simply less aware of the performance they're giving. They're less in control of how others perceive them. This might feel more comfortable, but it's not more virtuous. In fact, you could argue it's less respectful to others. When you consciously craft your identity, you're taking responsibility for the impact you have on people. You're being intentional about the energy you bring into spaces and relationships. Think about it this way: when you go to a job interview, do you show up exactly as you are at home? Do you talk about your problems? Do you complain? Do you slouch? Of course not. You present your best self. You emphasize your strengths. You dress well. You sit up straight. You're not being fake. You're being strategic. You're recognizing that different contexts require different versions of yourself. Now take that understanding and apply it to your entire life. The master of self-recreation doesn't have one identity. They have a repertoire of identities they can deploy depending on the situation. With their family, they're warm and vulnerable. In business negotiations, they're tough and calculating. At social events, they're charming and engaging. Each version is real in the moment. None is more authentic than the others. They're all tools in the toolkit of a sophisticated operator who understands that identity is situational. This brings us to the concept of code switching, which is well understood in discussions of race and class but applies more broadly to the art of self-recreation. Code switching is the ability to shift between different linguistic and behavioral patterns depending on context. A person might speak one way with their family and another way in professional settings. They might adopt different postures, different vocabularies, different personas. This isn't being fake. It's being socially intelligent. The person who can't code switch, who insists on being the same in all contexts, is actually revealing a lack of sophistication. They're like the tourist who goes to a foreign country and expects everyone to speak their language. They're imposing one version of themselves on situations that require flexibility. This might feel authentic to them, but it's actually a form of social incompetence masked as integrity. Now let's talk about the ultimate form of self-recreation, the complete reinvention. This is when you don't just modify aspects of your identity but fundamentally transform who you are. This is possible, but it requires specific conditions. First, you need a catalyst. This is usually a crisis, a death, a failure, a trauma, a profound realization. Something that breaks your attachment to your current identity. Second, you need isolation from your old environment and the people who knew the old you. Third, you need a clear vision of who you want to become. And fourth, you need time to practice your new identity until it becomes natural. History provides countless examples. Malcolm X transformed from a criminal to a minister to a human rights activist, with each identity completely different from the previous one. Oprah Winfrey transformed from an abused child to a local news anchor to a global media mogul and spiritual leader. Arnold Schwarzenegger transformed from an Austrian bodybuilder to a Hollywood action star to the governor of California. Each transformation required letting go of the previous identity and fully committing to the new one. But here's what they don't tell you in the inspirational stories: these transformations come at a cost. You lose relationships. You lose parts of yourself that might have been valuable. You create enemies among those who preferred the old you. You face constant accusations of being fake or selling out. The path of transformation is lonely because most people are too attached to their fixed identities to understand or accept your fluidity. This is why Law 25 is so rarely mastered. It requires not just skill but courage. It requires facing the existential terror of having no fixed self. It requires accepting that you're not a noun but a verb, not a thing but a process, not a being but a becoming. Most people can't handle that level of uncertainty. They need the illusion of a stable self even if that self is limiting them. There's a famous thought experiment called the ship of Theseus. If you replace every plank of a ship over time, is it still the same ship? Philosophers have debated this for millennia. But the question itself reveals the problem. We're obsessed with continuity and sameness. We need things to remain identical over time. But the truth is that nothing remains the same. Everything is in constant flux. The ship of Theseus is a different ship after every plank is replaced. And you are a different person with every thought you think, every choice you make, every moment you live. Accepting this truth is liberating. It means you're not trapped by your past. You're not bound by your mistakes. You're not limited by your history. Every moment is an opportunity to recreate yourself. Every breath is a chance to die and be reborn. You are not who you were yesterday. You don't have to be who you are today tomorrow. This is simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. The dark truth we must now confront is that this power can trap us in a different way. If identity is infinitely malleable, if we can be anyone, then we risk becoming no one. We risk losing all sense of continuity and meaning. We risk becoming pure performance with no substance underneath. This is the existential cost of mastering Law 25. You gain infinite freedom but risk losing the ground beneath your feet. Some people who fully embrace this law become sociopaths, capable of performing any identity without genuine emotion or connection. They've become so good at self-recreation that they've lost the ability to simply be. They're always performing, always calculating, always manipulating. They've won the game of power but lost their humanity. This is the Faustian bargain at the heart of this law. So where does this leave us? How do we use this power without being consumed by it? This is the crucial question. The answer lies in intention. Why are you recreating yourself? If it's purely for power, for manipulation, for selfish gain, then you'll likely end up hollow and disconnected. But if you're recreating yourself in service of something larger, if you're becoming who you need to be to fulfill a purpose or serve others or create something meaningful, then the transformation can be both powerful and authentic. Think of it this way: the actor who performs a role purely for money gives a hollow performance. The actor who finds genuine meaning in the character, who uses the role to explore deeper truths about human nature, gives a transcendent performance. Both are performing. Both are recreating themselves. But one is empty while the other is full of meaning. The difference is intention and purpose. This is where we must make a crucial distinction between two types of self-recreation. There's reactive self-recreation, where you change yourself to escape pain or gain advantage. And there's creative self-recreation, where you transform yourself to express your highest potential or serve a greater good. Both use the same techniques. Both involve consciously crafting identity. But the outcomes are radically different. Reactive self-recreation is what con artists do. It's what people do when they're running from themselves. It's transformation driven by fear, insecurity, or greed. Creative self-recreation is what artists and visionaries do. It's what people do when they're becoming their best selves. It's transformation driven by aspiration, purpose, and love. The techniques are the same, but the spirit is different. So here's what you must ask yourself: who am I becoming, and why? What is the purpose of my transformation? Am I running from something or running toward something? Am I trying to escape my authentic self or express it more fully? These questions have no easy answers, but they're essential to grapple with if you want to master this law without losing your soul. Let me share one final story that brings all of this together. There was a Japanese sword maker who spent 50 years perfecting his craft. He made thousands of swords, each one better than the last. When asked near the end of his life who he was, he said something profound: "I am not a sword maker. I am the process of making swords." He understood that his identity was not fixed but flowing. He was not a thing but an action. He had recreated himself so many times in pursuit of perfection that he had transcended the need for a fixed identity. This is the ultimate mastery of Law 25, not just the ability to recreate yourself, but the wisdom to recognize that you are the power of recreation itself. You're not any particular identity. You're the consciousness that can inhabit any identity. You're not the role. You're the actor. You're not the mask. You're the face behind all masks. This understanding dissolves the existential crisis because you stop identifying with any particular version of yourself. But even this level of understanding comes with challenges. When you realize you're not any fixed identity, when you experience the fluidity of self so completely, you can become unmoored. You lose the stability that most people take for granted. You're floating in a sea of infinite possibility with no anchor. This is why many mystics and philosophers who reached this understanding retreated from the world. The freedom was too much. The lack of boundaries was overwhelming. The solution is not to retreat but to create conscious structure. You choose identities deliberately, wear them consciously, and shed them when they no longer serve. You're like an actor who fully inhabits each role while never forgetting they're acting. You're present in each identity without being trapped by it. You're committed to each version of yourself without believing it's permanent. This is the balance point between rigid identity and formless chaos. Let's examine one more modern example that illustrates the full range of possibilities in self-recreation. Consider David Bowie. He didn't just change his musical style. He created entire personas: Ziggy Stardust, the Thin White Duke, Aladdin Sane. Each was a complete identity with its own aesthetic, philosophy, and way of being. He inhabited these personas so fully that they felt real. But he also knew when to kill them. When Ziggy Stardust had served his purpose, Bowie announced his death on stage and moved on. This is mastery. Bowie understood that identity is a creative tool. He used it to explore different aspects of human experience. He became different people to express different truths. And he never got trapped in any single identity, even when fans and critics begged him to stay. He kept transforming because transformation was his essence. He was not any particular persona. He was the artist who created personas. You can do the same in your own life, perhaps less dramatically but no less profoundly. You can create different versions of yourself for different life chapters. You can inhabit them fully while they serve you, then consciously let them die when it's time to evolve. You can be the student, then the professional, then the leader, then the mentor, each identity complete and authentic in its time, yet all temporary expressions of your deeper self. The key is awareness. Most people stumble through identity changes unconsciously, experiencing each transition as a crisis. They cling to old identities past their expiration date, creating suffering. Or they change reactively in response to external pressure, never choosing their own direction. The master of Law 25 makes identity changes consciously and deliberately. They decide when to transform, how to transform, and what to become. They're authoring their own story rather than being a character in someone else's narrative. Now, let's address the practical question of velocity. How fast should you transform? The answer depends on your situation and your courage. Gradual transformation is safer and more socially acceptable. You change bit by bit, allowing people to adjust to each new version of you. This minimizes resistance and maintains relationships. But it's also slower and can feel frustrating if you're ready for dramatic change. Radical transformation is faster but riskier. You make dramatic changes quickly, forcing yourself and others to adapt. This burns bridges and creates resistance. But it also forces commitment. When you've destroyed your old life, you have no choice but to make your new identity work. Some people need this kind of pressure to truly transform. They need to burn the boats so retreat is impossible. Most successful transformations involve a combination. You make a dramatic internal decision and commitment. This is the moment you truly choose to change. But you implement that decision gradually, learning and adjusting as you go. You're moving fast internally while appearing to change gradually externally. This gives you the benefits of both approaches, the commitment of radical transformation and the stability of gradual change. There's also the question of reversibility. Some identity changes can be undone if they don't work. You can try being more assertive, and if it doesn't fit, return to your previous style. But other changes are one-way doors. Once you've stepped through, you can't go back. Moving to a new country, changing careers radically, ending important relationships, these transformations have permanence. You need to know which type of change you're making and be prepared for the consequences. This brings us to the role of experimentation and self-recreation. Before committing to a major transformation, test it. Try on the new identity in low-stakes situations. Want to be more confident? Practice with strangers first, not your boss. Want to be more creative? Experiment in private before going public. This experimentation phase allows you to refine your new identity, discover what works, and build genuine skill rather than just performing emptily. The best transformations feel inevitable in retrospect, but they're actually carefully constructed through countless small experiments and adjustments. The person who seems to effortlessly inhabit a new identity has usually spent months or years practicing in private. They've failed, adjusted, refined, and practiced until the new identity became second nature. The public sees only the final performance, not the rehearsals. Let me share one more crucial insight about timing. There are windows of opportunity for transformation. Major life transitions, graduation, marriage, divorce, career changes, moving, losses, create natural openings for identity change. During these transitions, everyone expects you to be different. The social pressure for consistency is temporarily suspended. If you're strategic, you can use these windows to make changes that would be difficult otherwise. But you can also create your own windows. You don't have to wait for life to force change upon you. You can deliberately create transition moments. Take a sabbatical. Go on a retreat. Make a symbolic gesture that marks the end of one identity and the beginning of another. Humans are ritualistic creatures. We respond to ceremonies and symbols. Use this tendency to facilitate your own transformation. Now we arrive at the final question: what comes after mastery? When you've fully internalized Law 25, when you can recreate yourself at will, when you've transcended attachment to any fixed identity, what then? This is where the law becomes truly profound. Because the ultimate goal is not to become anyone in particular. It's to become free from the tyranny of identity itself. The final stage of mastery is playfulness. You wear identities lightly, trying them on and discarding them without attachment. You're serious about your commitments in the moment but not taking yourself too seriously. You're fully present in each role without believing you are that role. This is the state that Zen Buddhists call emptiness and Taoists call wu-wei. It's action without ego, performance without attachment, change without resistance. In this state, you stop asking who am I, because you realize the question itself is the trap. You're not a who. You're a process, a flow, a constant becoming. You're the space in which identities arise and dissolve. You're the consciousness that experiences all these versions of self without being defined by any of them. This sounds mystical, but it's actually the most practical approach to life. When you're not defending a fixed identity, you're free to adapt to any situation, become whatever is needed, serve whatever is calling. So what do you do with this power? That's the question I promised to leave you with. Now that you understand that you can recreate yourself, that identity is fluid, that you're not trapped by your past or your personality or your circumstances, what will you do? Will you use this knowledge to manipulate others? Will you use it to escape from yourself? Or will you use it to become the highest version of what you can be? The answer to that question will determine not just your success but your soul. Because power without purpose is just chaos. Freedom without direction is just confusion. The ability to be anyone means nothing if you don't know who you want to become. So before you start recreating yourself, before you shed your old identity and forge a new one, ask yourself, in service of what? For what purpose? Toward what end? These questions don't have universal answers. Each person must answer them for themselves. But the questions themselves are essential. They're what separate transformation from mere change. They're what give meaning to the fluid, terrifying, exhilarating reality that you are not and never were who you thought you were. You have always been and will always be pure potential, consciousness in motion, a work in progress that will never be finished. This is Law 25, recreate yourself. Not once, but constantly. Not to escape, but to grow. Not to deceive, but to become. Master this law, and you master life itself. Fail to master it, and you'll spend your life imprisoned by an identity that was never truly yours to begin with. The choice, as always, has been and always will be yours. But now at least you see the game. Now at least you understand that you are not a fixed thing but a fluid process. Now you must decide, what will you become?